Ambassador Kim Woo-jin pulled at his stiff diplomatic uniform one more time, before walking into the massive Galactic Council chambers. The room was so huge that Earth's biggest stadium would look like a toy inside it. Hundreds of alien species filled the curved seats that stretched up toward a dome ceiling covered in swirling stars. The air buzzed with translation devices turning dozens of alien languages into something humans could understand. But right now, all those translation devices were carrying the same sound: laughter. Not the friendly kind you share with friends, but the cruel kind that makes your stomach twist into knots. The Vethak delegates looked like living crystal sculptures, each one taller than two humans stacked on top of each other. Their bodies caught the chamber's light and threw it around in rainbow patterns. When they found something funny, they clicked their sharp, glass-like fingers together. The clicking sound echoed through the chamber like breaking ice. Next to them sat the Morvac representatives, creatures that looked like giant octopuses made of purple jelly. Their tentacles writhed and twisted when they were amused, creating waves of motion that rippled through their section of the chamber. Each tentacle was as thick as a person's waist and covered in suckers that glowed with soft light. Captain Lee. Minho stood beside Wu Jin, his military uniform pressed and perfect despite the long journey from Earth. His jaw was locked tight and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Every time another wave of alien laughter rolled through the chamber, his shoulders tensed up more. Wu Jin could see a muscle jumping in Minho's cheek as he fought to keep his anger under control. The worst part wasn't even the laughter itself. It was how casual it all felt. These aliens weren't even trying to be mean. To them, humans were just naturally funny, like watching a dog try to use chopsticks or a baby attempt to drive a car. The idea that humans could be dangerous or important was so ridiculous that it sent them into fits of giggles. Prime Chancellor Vexthal rose from his crystalline throne at the center of the chamber. He was the biggest Vethak in the room. His crystal body shot through with veins of gold that pulsed with each word he spoke. When he talked, his voice came through the translation matrix, sounding like glass bells mixed with ice cracking on a frozen lake. "So the little Terrans want to join our coalition," he said, and even through the translation Wu Jin could hear the amusement dripping from every word. "Tell me, small ones, what exactly makes you think you belong among civilized species?" The holographic displays around the chamber suddenly lit up, showing scene after scene of human military disasters. There was the Battle of Kepler 9, where an entire human fleet got wiped out by just 3 enemy ships, the Proxima mining incident, where space pirates took over human operations using weapons that were practically antiques by galactic standards, the New Tokyo colony, where human defenders lasted exactly 47 minutes against an attack that any other species would have handled easily. Each image made the alien laughter grow louder. Wu Jin watched his species' failures play out in brilliant holographic detail, knowing that billions of aliens across the galaxy were probably watching this broadcast and having the same reaction. Humans were the comedy relief of the universe. "We understand our current limitations," Wu Jin said, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "But we believe that every species deserves a chance to contribute to galactic peace. We request only the opportunity to prove that humanity can be a valuable ally." The laughter got so loud that the translation matrix started producing feedback, squeals. A photonic entity named Zarmesh floated forward, its energy body shifting through colors that the translation system said meant pure amusement mixed with disbelief. "Prove what exactly?" Zarmesh's voice sounded like music played through broken speakers. "That you can lose even more embarrassingly than you already have. Your weapons fire chunks of metal like primitive cannons. Your ships run on chemical explosions like ancient firecrackers. Your soldiers are bags of meat that break when you poke them too hard." More displays lit up, showing human technology compared to galactic standards. Human railguns looked like toys next to energy weapons that could punch holes through planets. Human fusion engines were like candles compared to the matter conversion systems that powered alien ships. Even human armor looked like it was made from tin foil when you put it next to the energy shields and adaptive materials that real civilizations used. "For your entire military budget," continued another alien voice, this one belonging to a creature that looked like a floating brain surrounded by tentacles, is less than what most species spend on entertainment. Your biggest warship has fewer weapons than our smallest patrol craft. Your most advanced computer is slower than the calculator in a child's toy. The betting pools started forming even before the official session ended. Wu Jin could see aliens in the gallery making gestures that the translation system identified as wagers. But they weren't betting on whether humanity would survive in the hostile galaxy. That was apparently too obvious to be interesting. Instead, they were betting on how long it would take before humans either went completely extinct or became servants to some stronger species. Some aliens were giving humanity 50 years. Others thought that was too generous and put their money on 20 years. A few optimists thought humans might last a century if they got really lucky and found a powerful patron to protect them. The Galactic Coalition has no place for species that cannot defend themselves, Prime Chancellor Vexthul announced with finality. Your application is rejected. We suggest you find more realistic goals for your primitive civilization. As the session officially ended and the aliens began filing out, Wu Jin heard dozens of conversations in the background. Most of them were still about humans, but not in any way that made him feel better. They talked about humanity like people. Might discuss a new comedy show. Entertaining, but ultimately not very important. Captain Lee Min-ho moved closer as they prepared to leave the chamber. His voice was barely above a whisper, but Wu Jin could hear the tight control in every word. Sir, we've got incoming reports from the outer colonies. Long-range sensors are picking up hegemony battle groups moving toward the Kepler system. Looks like they're planning another raid. Wu Jin nodded, feeling the weight of inevitable disaster settling on his shoulders. In a few days there would be fresh footage of human failures to entertain the galaxy. More colonies lost, more ships destroyed, more proof that humanity was nothing but a cosmic joke. But as they walked through the massive corridors toward their small, primitive transport ship, Wu Jin couldn't shake the feeling that the aliens were missing something important. They saw human weakness, but they didn't see human determination. They saw human failures, but they didn't see how quickly humans learned from those failures. Maybe they were right to laugh now. But Wu Jin had a strange feeling that the laughter wouldn't last forever. 6 months had passed since humanity's humiliating rejection at the Galactic Council, and things had only gotten worse. Commander Park Ji-woo stood on the bridge of the aging frigate Soul's Pride, watching the tactical display with growing dread. The ship was nearly 30 years old, held together with spare parts and determination. Its hull was scarred from a dozen battles, and the engine made worrying noises. Every time they pushed it past half speed, the display showed the grim reality of humanity's situation. 3 colonies in 3 weeks, all lost to the hegemony of scales. New Geneva, with its population of 50,000 farmers and miners, had fallen without a fight. The orbital stations around Kepler 7 were now smoking ruins drifting in space. Worst of all was the research colony on Titan's Edge, where brilliant human scientists had been working on new technologies that might have helped level the playing field. Now those same scientists were working in alien mining facilities, their knowledge serving their captors. The hegemony wasn't even trying to be subtle about it anymore. They treated human colonies like convenience stores, easy targets to raid whenever they needed supplies or workers. Their ships would arrive, demand surrender, and within hours human civilians would be loaded onto transport vessels like cargo. Ma'am, we're picking up massive energy signatures from the asteroid belt, Lieutenant Nam Da-som called out from her sensor station. She was barely 22 years old, fresh out of the academy, but she'd already seen more combat than officers. Twice her age. Looks like our intelligence was right. They're using the old mining depot as a staging ground. Ji-woo moved to the sensor display and studied the readings. 47 ships, arranged in a defensive formation around the abandoned human mining facility. The hegemony had turned it into their own personal supply base, using it to launch raids, deeper into human space. 3 heavy cruisers anchored the formation, each one bigger than Ji-woo's entire fleet combined. The smart thing to do would be to retreat. Any military academy in the galaxy would teach that 12 ships against nearly 50 was suicide, especially when those 50 included capital ships with enough firepower to crack a moon. But retreating meant abandoning the thousands of human Prisoners being held at that depot. It meant letting the hegemony continue using human infrastructure to destroy more human colonies. "Ma'am," her tactical officer Kim Tae-hyung spoke up nervously, "the odds are pretty bad here. Maybe we should wait for reinforcements." "What reinforcements?" Ji-woo asked with a bitter laugh. "Earth's entire fleet is spread across 50 light-years, trying to protect what's left of our colonies. We're what humanity can spare for this mission." She looked around at her bridge crew. They were all so young, most of them in their 20s. Da-som had joined the fleet to see the galaxy and ended up fighting for humanity's survival instead. Tae-hyung had wanted to be an engineer, but got drafted when the war turned desperate. None of them had signed up for this kind of hopeless mission, but that was the thing about humans that the galaxy didn't understand yet. When faced with impossible odds, they didn't always make the smart choice. Sometimes they made the desperate choice, the crazy choice, the choice that shouldn't work, but somehow did. "All ships, this is Commander Park," she announced over the fleet communication channel. "We're going in fast and hard. Use the asteroid field for cover and target their supply vessels first. If we can destroy their stockpiles, maybe we can slow down their next wave of attacks." The response was immediate. Every ship captain in her small fleet acknowledged the order without question. No one asked about the odds or suggested retreating. They all knew what was at stake. The Soul's Pride led the charge into the asteroid field, its old engines finally running at full power. Behind her came 11 other ships, frigates, destroyers, and converted civilian vessels that had been pressed into military service. None of them were in perfect condition. Most were running on jury-rigged systems and patched hull plates. "Commander, their sensors have picked us up," Tae-hyung reported. "The hegemony formation is shifting to intercept. They're moving to surround us." Ji-woo watched the enemy ships spreading out like the jaws of a trap. It was exactly what any competent military force would do when facing a smaller enemy. Use superior numbers to box them in and destroy them systematically. "Then we don't fight like they expect us to," Ji-woo said calmly. "Da-som, reroute power. From life support to engines. We're going to need every bit of speed we can get. Tae-hyung, prepare the kinetic torpedoes and target the supply ships, not the warships. What happened next would be studied in military academies for decades to come, though at the time it just felt like controlled chaos. When the hegemony ships moved to encircle the human fleet, Ji-woo ordered her ships to scatter in every direction. Instead of staying in formation like proper military vessels, they split up and used the floating asteroids as cover. The hegemony. Commanders had never seen anything like it. Their energy weapons were designed to destroy ships that fought in orderly formations, not targets that darted between asteroids like startled fish. Every time they lined up a shot, their target would disappear behind a chunk of rock or change direction completely. "Their formation is adapting," Tae-hyung called out as hegemony ships tried to adjust their positions. "They're trying to cut off our escape routes." "Then we adapt faster," Ji-woo replied, her hands dancing over the control panel. "All ships, Pattern 7. Use the debris field and stay inside their weapon range." Pattern 7 wasn't in any military manual because Ji-woo had made it up 5 minutes earlier. It involved using the Soul's Pride as bait while the other human ships approached the supply depot from different angles. When the hegemony cruisers moved to intercept the flagship, the smaller human vessels slipped through the gaps in their formation. The human ships started launching their primitive kinetic torpedoes. Chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. Against the heavily armored hegemony warships, they barely scratched the paint. But against the supply vessels and fuel depots, they were devastatingly effective. One by one, the supply ships began exploding. Fuel storage tanks ruptured, sending chains of explosions rippling through the depot. Ammunition stockpiles detonated in brilliant flashes that lit up the asteroid field like fireworks. The hegemony commanders couldn't believe what they were seeing. A handful of primitive human ships had just destroyed supplies that had taken months to accumulate. Worse, they'd done it using tactics that made no sense according to established military doctrine. In the confusion, human rescue shuttles darted between the explosions to reach the prisoner transport ships. Thousands of human civilians were evacuated in the chaos, loaded onto ships that immediately fled toward the edge of the system. When the smoke cleared, the supply depot was gone. 6 hegemony vessels had been destroyed in the explosions, and Their entire supply operation had been crippled. The human fleet had lost 3 ships, but they'd achieved something that should have been impossible. Across the galaxy, news networks struggled to explain what had happened. Most dismissed it as incredible luck, a fluke that wouldn't happen again. The hegemony commanders filed reports claiming equipment malfunctions and tactical errors, unwilling to admit they'd been outmaneuvered by primitive humans. But in the quiet offices of military academies on a dozen different worlds, a few instructors pulled up the battle recordings and watched them over and over again. They saw something that disturbed them deeply. Humans who didn't fight according to any known rules, who adapted faster than their enemies could respond, and who seemed to treat desperate odds as just another tactical challenge. For the first time in galactic history, some military experts began to wonder if they'd been underestimating humanity all along. Colonel Yoon Jae-min sat in his office, high above the crystal spires of the Zephyrian capital, surrounded by holographic displays that showed military data from across the galaxy. His species had been studying warfare for over 3,000 years, perfecting the art of strategic analysis until it became almost a science. The Zephyrians prided themselves on being able to predict the outcome of any battle just by looking at the numbers, ship counts, weapon types, crew training levels, and technological advantages. But the files scattered across his desk were making him question everything he thought he knew about military strategy. He pulled up the latest report and watched the holographic battle replay for the 5th time that day. The humans had just pulled off their 3rd impossible victory in 2 months, this time against a full mollusk blockade around Earth's primary shipping routes. The mollusks were experienced raiders who had been perfecting their blockade tactics for centuries. They knew exactly how to position their ships to cut off trade routes and force surrender through economic pressure. The human response should have been predictable. Any civilized species would either negotiate for safe passage or send a proper military fleet to break the blockade using standard formation tactics. Instead, the humans had done something that made no sense according to every military manual ever written. "Computer, show me the cargo vessel transformations again," Jae-min commanded. The holographic display zoomed in on what had appeared to be ordinary human merchant ships approaching the blockade. The mollusks had barely paid attention to them. Civilian vessels weren't considered threats in normal warfare. But as the replay showed, these weren't normal civilian ships anymore. Hidden weapon ports suddenly opened along their hulls. Solar panels folded back to reveal missile batteries. Cargo containers ejected from their holds, but instead of floating away as junk, they moved with purpose toward mollusk vessels. The containers had been turned into improvised torpedoes, packed with explosives and guided by simple navigation systems. What looked like a chaotic merchant convoy had actually been a carefully disguised military strike force. "The most disturbing part," Jae-min muttered to himself, "is how quickly they adapted when the mollusks figured out the trick." The replay showed the moment when the mollusk commanders realized they were under attack and began targeting the disguised merchant ships. Any other species would have either retreated or stuck to their original plan. The humans did neither. Instead, they immediately switched tactics in the middle of the battle. Civilian shuttles that had been carrying supplies suddenly became suicide bombers, ramming into mollusk command ships at high speed. Cargo haulers used their industrial equipment as weapons, firing mining lasers and construction tools at enemy vessels. What appeared to be a panicked retreat turned into a pincer movement that caught the mollusks completely off guard. Lieutenant. Seo Yuna knocked on his door and entered, without waiting for permission. She was young for a strategic analyst, but she had an eye for patterns that impressed even veteran officers. In her hands were several data tablets that she placed on his desk with obvious urgency. "Sir, we just received intelligence from the Photonic Collective about their attempt to capture the human research station at Proxima 7, she said, her voice tight with concern. Jamin looked up from his holographic display. "Attempted, you said, past tense." "Yes, sir, the operation failed completely. The humans somehow predicted the entire quantum bombardment pattern before it happened. They had countermeasures ready that our scientists say shouldn't exist for another century." That got Jamin's full attention. The Photonic Collective were masters of energy manipulation, capable of creating weapon patterns that shifted through quantum states to avoid conventional defenses. Their attacks were supposed to be unpredictable by definition, changing too rapidly for any targeting system to track. "Show me the tactical analysis," he ordered. Yuna activated one of the tablets, and a new holographic display appeared, showing the failed photonic attack. The energy beings had approached the human station using their standard quantum bombardment technique, weapons that flickered between different dimensional states to bypass shields and armor. But the humans had been ready. Their station's defensive systems tracked every quantum shift, predicting the attack patterns with impossible accuracy. More disturbing still, they'd developed weapons that could hurt energy-based life forms, something that should have taken decades of research to accomplish. "How did they know?" Jamin asked, studying the data streams. "The Photonic Collective has used this attack pattern successfully for over a millennium. No one has ever been able to counter it." "That's what disturbs me, sir," Yuna replied. "According to our intelligence, the humans only encountered photonic weapons for the first time 6 months ago, but somehow they developed effective countermeasures in a fraction of the time it should have taken." Jamin leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. His mind was racing through implications that made him increasingly uncomfortable. He'd spent his entire career studying how different species fought wars, and every civilization in the galaxy followed predictable patterns. The Vethak relied on overwhelming technological superiority, using their advanced weapons to destroy enemies before they could get close. The Morvac used swarm tactics, sending hundreds of small ships to overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer numbers. The photonic entities manipulated energy and matter at the quantum level, fighting battles that existed partially outside normal space-time. Even the newer species that joined the galactic community eventually fell into established patterns. They might have unique technologies or cultural approaches, but they still fought according to military doctrines that had been refined over thousands of years. But humans were different. They didn't seem to have any established doctrine at all. Instead, they fought like each battle was a completely new problem that required a completely new solution. They learned from every engagement, adapted their tactics in real time, and seemed to treat impossible odds as just another challenge to overcome. "Yuna, pull up the comparative analysis of human versus galactic military development," Jamin ordered. The holographic display shifted to show evolutionary timelines for different species' military capabilities. Most civilizations developed their combat doctrines over thousands of years, slowly refining and perfecting their approaches until they reached a stable, predictable pattern. The human timeline looked completely different. In just 2 years of serious warfare, they'd gone from being a joke to achieving victories that made no sense according to established military theory. Their development curve was almost vertical, showing adaptation rates that should have been impossible. "Sir," Yuna said quietly, "I think their shorter lifespans might actually be an advantage we never considered." Jamin nodded slowly. Most galactic species lived for centuries or millennia, which meant their military leaders often spent decades or centuries perfecting single tactical approaches. Humans lived for less than a century, which meant their military commanders had to learn fast or die trying. More importantly, human generations turned over rapidly. New commanders with fresh ideas took over from older ones before outdated thinking could become entrenched. What the galaxy saw as biological weakness, short lifespans, and rapid generational change might actually be humanity's greatest strategic asset. "There's something else, sir," Yuna continued, activating another display. "I've been tracking betting patterns in the galactic gambling networks. 6 months ago, the odds against humanity in any conflict were usually around 50 to 1. Now they're down to 3 to 1 and dropping every week. That was perhaps the most alarming news of all. Galactic betting networks weren't just entertainment. They were sophisticated prediction markets that analyzed vast amounts of data to calculate probabilities. Professional military analysts, intelligence agencies, and even government planning departments used betting odds as a reliable indicator of likely outcomes. If the odds were shifting that rapidly, it meant the galaxy's smartest analytical minds were starting to take humanity seriously as a military threat. Jamin stood up and walked to his office window, looking out at the crystal spires of his home city. Somewhere out there, human ships were probably engaged in another impossible battle, using tactics that defied every military manual ever written. Yuna, draft a priority message to High Command, classification level maximum. Title it, The Human Problem. His aide paused, stylus hovering over her tablet. Problem, sir? They're not fighting like anyone else in the galaxy, Jamin said grimly, which means all our standard military models, all our strategic planning, all our threat assessments might be completely inadequate when it comes to dealing with humanity. He turned back to his desk and the pile of impossible human victories, waiting for analysis. Somewhere in those files was a pattern that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The question was whether they'd figure it out before the humans surprised everyone again. Admiral Choi Sung-min stood on the bridge of the Incheon Rising, humanity's newest and most advanced warship, watching what should have been the end of human civilization. Through the massive view screen he could see the Crimson Horde's invasion fleet stretching across space like a wall of death. Over 300 ships filled the void around Titan's Gate, the strategic choke point that controlled access to Earth's inner colonies. The Crimson Horde wasn't just another raiding force or opportunistic pirate fleet. They were the galaxy's most feared military power, a nomadic warrior culture that had conquered 17 star systems in the past 50 years. Their ships were massive, their technology was advanced, and their tactics had been perfected through centuries of constant warfare. When the Horde decided to eliminate a species, that species usually disappeared within months. They'd come to finish what other alien races had started, the complete destruction of humanity as a galactic power. The Horde's supreme war leader had broadcast his intentions across every communication channel in human space. There would be no negotiations, no surrender terms, no mercy. Humanity would be wiped out as an example to other primitive species who dared to challenge their betters. Admiral, long-range sensors are picking up the Horde's battle formation, reported Commander Lee Dong-wook from the tactical station. They're arranged in their traditional conquest pattern. Heavy battleships in the center, fast attack vessels. On the flanks, support ships protected in the rear. Sung-min studied the tactical display with growing concern. The human fleet looked pathetically small in comparison, just 68 ships of various sizes. Most of them converted civilian vessels or aging military frigates. Against any other enemy, it would have been suicide to engage such overwhelming odds. But humanity had learned something important over the past 2 years of constant warfare. They discovered that the galaxy's military powers were all fighting the same old wars, using the same old tactics. The Crimson Horde might be incredibly successful, but they were successful using methods that hadn't changed in centuries. All ships, this is Admiral Choi, he announced over the fleet communication channel. You all know what's at stake here. If we lose this battle, there won't be another one. The Horde has made it clear they intend to exterminate our entire species. He paused, looking around at his bridge crew. They were all so young, most of them barely out of their 20s. 2 years ago, they'd been students, office workers, farmers, and shop owners. Now they were humanity's last hope against the galaxy's most dangerous military force. But here's what the Horde doesn't understand about humans, Sung-min continued. We don't fight fair, we don't follow the rules, and we definitely don't give up just because the odds look bad. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you try to exterminate a species that refuses to die quietly. The battle began exactly as every military expert in the galaxy expected. The Crimson Horde's massive battleships opened fire with weapons that could crack moons, sending streams of destructive energy across space toward the human fleet. Their attack craft launched in perfect formation, moving to encircle and destroy the smaller human vessels. For the first few minutes, it looked like the massacre everyone predicted. 3 human ships were destroyed almost immediately, their hulls torn apart by energy weapons far more advanced than anything humanity possessed. The Horde's fighters swarmed through space in disciplined formations, targeting human vessels with precise, deadly efficiency. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating or trying to match the Horde's formation tactics, the human fleet scattered in every direction like startled birds. Ships that should have stayed together to concentrate their firepower suddenly split up and began moving in patterns that made no tactical sense according to established military doctrine. Captain. Oh Hee-jin's voice crackled over the communication channel from her ship, the Busan Defender. Admiral, launching assault shuttles now. Beginning boarding operations on target vessels 7 through 12. Boarding operations? General Rex Thul's voice cut through the comm channel with obvious disbelief. The Vethak military observer had been sent by the Stellar Defense Coalition to witness humanity's final defeat. But now he sounded confused rather than satisfied. Against capital ships, that's impossible. Sungmin watched his tactical display with growing amazement as dozens of small human assault shuttles launched from the scattered fleet. They moved like angry insects, darting between the massive horde, vessels too quickly for the big guns to track. The Crimson Horde's weapons were designed to destroy other large warships, not tiny, fast-moving targets that changed direction every few seconds. What should have been suicide runs turned into something the galaxy had never seen before. Human shuttles attached themselves to Horde vessels like parasites, cutting through hull armor with industrial mining lasers and boarding the enemy ships directly. "This is Captain O reporting from inside the Horde flagship," Hee-jin's voice came through the comm with obvious excitement. "Marines have secured the main corridor. We're advancing toward the bridge. How is that possible?" General Rex Thul demanded, his crystalline form flickering with agitation. "The Crimson Horde has never lost a capital ship in combat. Their vessels are supposed to be impregnable." Sung Min allowed himself a small smile. "General, with all due respect, you've been fighting the same wars for centuries using the same tactics your ancestors developed. We've been fighting for our species' survival, which means we've had to get creative." On his tactical display, Sung Min could see what was happening inside the Horde vessels. Sergeant Moon Ki-tai was leading his Marine squad through the corridors of an enemy dreadnought, using nothing but kinetic weapons, basically advanced machine guns that fired metal bullets. Against the Horde's energy shields and advanced armor, such primitive weapons should have been useless. But the humans weren't trying to outgun their enemies. Instead, they were using tactics that the Horde had never encountered before. They moved through the ships like ghosts, using ventilation systems and maintenance tunnels to avoid direct confrontation. When they did fight, they used the ship's own systems against their crews, turning life support failures and artificial gravity fluctuations into weapons. The footage being broadcast across the galaxy would become legendary. Human Marines in basic armor, carrying weapons that looked like museum pieces, systematically taking control of advanced alien warships through sheer determination and tactical innovation. They turned engineering sections into ambush points, used gravity generators to trap enemy soldiers, and converted medical bays into temporary prisons for captured crew members. "Admiral, we've got control of their flagship's weapons systems," reported Captain O, requesting permission to use their own guns against the rest of their fleet. "Permission granted," Sung Min replied, barely believing what he was hearing. The tide of battle shifted dramatically as captured Horde vessels began firing on their own fleet. The Crimson Horde's commanders couldn't understand what was happening. Their most advanced warships were turning against them, using their own superior technology to destroy other Horde vessels. Meanwhile, the scattered human fleet regrouped and began using captured enemy weapons to even the odds. Ships that had been outgunned moments before suddenly had access to the galaxy's most advanced military technology, operated by crews who were learning to use it in real time. The battle that was supposed to end in humanity's extinction instead became the Crimson Horde's worst defeat in centuries. When the fighting finally stopped, 12 Horde capital ships had been captured intact, along with thousands of prisoners. The remainder of their invasion fleet was either destroyed or retreating in complete disarray. The galactic news networks, which had been prepared to broadcast humanity's final moments, found themselves struggling to explain what had just happened. Military experts who had confidently predicted human defeat were suddenly speechless, unable to comprehend how primitive kinetic weapons and boarding tactics had overcome the galaxy's most advanced military force. For the first time in decades, the galactic news feeds went completely silent. The species that had been the butt of every military joke for years had just achieved something that shouldn't have been possible. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a nervous quiet that stretched across civilized space. In military academies throughout the galaxy, instructors began rewriting their textbooks. The old rules of warfare, perfected over millennia, suddenly seemed inadequate. A new chapter in galactic military history had begun, and humanity had written it in the wreckage of their enemy's most powerful fleet. The joke was definitely no longer funny. 2 years had passed since that desperate battle at Titan's Gate, and Ambassador Kim Woo-jin found himself walking through the same massive corridors of the Galactic Council chambers where humanity had once been laughed out of the room. But everything was different now. The air itself felt different, charged with a tension that hadn't existed before. The same alien species filled the curved seats that stretched toward the dome ceiling, but their body language had completely changed. The crystal-like Vethak no longer clicked their appendages in amusement. Instead, they sat perfectly still, their translucent forms dim with what humans had learned to recognize as nervous uncertainty. The tentacled Morvac weren't writhing with mirth anymore. Their movements were careful, controlled, like they were trying not to attract attention. Even the floating photonic entities seemed subdued, their usual bright energy patterns muted to soft, cautious glows. The chamber that had once echoed with cruel laughter now hummed with whispered conversations and the soft rustle of nervous movement. Woo-jin straightened his diplomatic uniform, the same one he'd worn 2 years ago, though it had been repaired several times since then. The fabric bore small scars from the boarding action he'd participated in during the Battle of Kepler Station, when diplomats had been forced to pick up weapons alongside Marines. Those had been desperate times when every human who could hold a gun was needed in the fight for survival. Beside him stood General Lee So-young, her military uniform a stark contrast to the diplomatic setting. Her face was marked with scars from a dozen boarding actions across 3 different star systems. She'd lost her left eye during the siege of Proxima Base and walked with a slight limp from shrapnel wounds sustained while leading Marines through the corridors of a captured hegemony cruiser. But she stood straight and proud, representing the new breed of human military leaders who had emerged from 2 years of constant warfare. On his other side was Captain Park Min-seo, barely 30 years old, but already a legend throughout human space. Her uniform was decorated with medals from battles that had seemed impossible to win. The Vega campaign, where her small fleet had held off an entire alien armada for 6 days, and the liberation of Cygnus, where she'd rescued 10,000 human prisoners using nothing but converted cargo ships and brilliant tactical improvisation. These weren't the same humans who had been dismissed as primitive jokes 2 years ago. War had forged them into something harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than anyone in the galaxy had imagined possible. Prime Chancellor Vex Thul rose from his crystalline throne, but his movements lacked the confident authority he'd displayed during their last meeting. His golden veins pulsed with dim, uncertain light as he spoke through the translation matrix. "The Galactic Security Council," he began, his voice carrying none of its former condescension, "recognizes the Terran Federation as a founding member of the new Interstellar Defense Organization." The words that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago hung in the air like a challenge to reality itself. Humanity, the species that couldn't defend mining operations from common pirates, was being invited to help lead galactic military policy. But Woo-jin had learned something important during 2 years of desperate warfare. When you're fighting for your species' survival, you don't accept anything less than what you need to guarantee that survival. "We accept the invitation," he said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "but with specific conditions that are non-negotiable." A ripple of nervous movement went through the assembled delegates. 2 years ago, humans had begged for the chance to prove themselves. Now they were making demands of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. "First," Woo-jin continued, "equal representation in all military decisions affecting galactic security. No more junior partnerships or advisory roles. When the Security Council votes on military action, humanity's voice carries the same weight as any other founding member. Second, full technology sharing agreements. The days of treating human scientific advancement as a joke are over. We've proven we can take your most advanced weapons and improve them in ways you never imagined. Now we want access to develop those improvements legitimately. Third, and most importantly, protection for emerging species who face the same dismissive treatment we once endured. Never again will a young civilization be laughed out of these chambers because they don't meet someone else's definition of advanced. The photonic entity Zarmesh floated forward, its energy patterns pulsing with what the translation system identified as nervous anxiety. The Terrans have certainly proven their military capabilities beyond any reasonable question, it said, its voice carrying undertones of barely controlled fear. But what assurance do we have regarding your long-term intentions? Your species has shown a disturbing capacity for rapid adaptation and tactical innovation. Captain Park Min-seo stepped forward, her young face marked with the kind of scars that only came from close-quarters combat in the metal corridors of alien warships. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had stared death in the face and walked away victorious more times than anyone should have to. Our intentions are simple and haven't changed since we first came to this chamber, she said. We fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We adapt because we must, because the alternative is extinction. We win because losing means our children don't get to exist. She gestured toward the holographic displays that ringed the chamber, currently showing peaceful star charts instead of the battle footage that had dominated galactic news for the past 2 years. Look at what we've accomplished together. The Crimson Horde is no longer a threat to anyone because we dismantled their entire military structure. The hegemony of scales has stopped enslaving civilian populations because they know we'll come for them if they try. Pirate raids on trade routes have dropped by 90% because word has spread. Humans don't negotiate with slavers and raiders. She paused, looking around the chamber at delegates who had once found humanity's military efforts amusing. You want to know our intentions? We intend to make sure that no species ever again faces the choice between extinction and surrender. We intend to ensure that every civilization gets the chance to prove what they're capable of, regardless of how primitive their technology might look to more advanced powers. General Lee So-young added her voice to the discussion, her scarred face serious as she addressed the assembled delegates. We've learned something important during these past 2 years of warfare. Most galactic civilizations fight wars the same way their ancestors did centuries ago. You've perfected your tactics, refined your strategies, and created military doctrines that work beautifully against enemies who fight the same way you do. But when you encounter a species that doesn't follow those rules, that adapts faster than your planning cycles can accommodate, that treats every engagement as a learning experience rather than a predetermined outcome, your perfect strategies become weaknesses. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. The assembled delegates were beginning to understand that humanity hadn't just won a few lucky battles. They'd fundamentally changed the nature of galactic warfare itself. As the EIDC formal session concluded with humanity's unanimous acceptance as a founding member of the Galactic Security Council, Wu Jin noticed something that would have been impossible to imagine 2 years ago. The betting pools were active again in the galleries above the main chamber, with aliens placing wagers on various galactic conflicts and territorial disputes. But now, regardless of the stated odds, regardless of technological advantages or numerical superiority, the smart money was always placed on the same outcome. Professional gamblers who made their living by calculating probabilities had learned a simple rule that was reshaping galactic politics one battle at a time: never bet against the humans. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would echo through the centuries. Never underestimate a species with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Humanity had transformed from the galaxy's favorite joke into its most dangerous ally, and the laughter had been permanently replaced by respectful silence. The age of human military dominance had begun.